Back in 2022, I wrote a review for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and in that review, I said it was one of the best mainline Pokemon games of all time. Now that line got me in a bit of trouble, but after 500 hours of playtime and a sexy new Switch 2 update, I figured now is the perfect time to revisit that. So first things first, 2022 was a while ago. What did my review back then say? Well, I gave it an 8 out of 10, and one of the pros that I had was how wide open this Pokemon game felt. You could explore the environment after you get through the intro. You could tackle the gym leaders in any order you wanted. There were other challenges you could do in the world, and it was very easy to build an interesting and different team early on than you would normally see in other Pokemon games. Another thing that I really liked about it was the terrestrialization mechanic. It looked a little funky when the Pokemon got their hat or whatever with the type. However, I thought it brought a lot of depth to the battles, especially playing online, playing competitive. That in particular, I thought was great. And you know what? I was right about that. I mean, I think this is probably one of the most interesting and engaging competitive Pokemon scenes that we've seen in a very long time. And it's not all due to terrestrialization, but I think that is a big part of it. It adds so much more dynamic than something like Megas. I love Megas, Megas are cool, but you know exactly which Mega evolution is going to be on the battlefield when you start a battle with someone. Now, cons. So one thing I talked about, maybe not enough, was the performance, particularly the visuals.
Unfortunately, the muddy visuals undercut the moment. Mesagoza looks like a collection of off-white shapes in the distance. The trees look more like green blobs than trees, and the rotating Pokeball above the Pokemon Center moves at only a few frames per second. While the Pokemon and key characters are well rendered, not much else is. Textures are missing, objects in the distance are pixelated and jittery, Pokemon and NPCs are constantly popping in and out due to poor draw distances, and battles on uneven terrain will frequently cause the camera to clip through the ground.
I thought the visuals looked really bad. Frankly, they still kind of do, even running on the Nintendo Switch 2 with the 4K resolution, 60 frames a second. It looks clearer, it runs better, but I just don't really like the art style. I think back to like Pokemon Let's Go, which came out on the Switch, I believe in 2017 or 2018, and I still think that is the best a Pokemon game has ever looked. Say what you will about that game, I know a lot of people didn't like the catching mechanics, but I think visually that is still the most interesting Pokemon game they've made. And Scarlet and Violet kind of didn't hit that for me. Now, I will say in hindsight, one thing that I probably should have talked about more was the frame rate. If I am being honest, this is very unpopular. I don't think frame rate is super important for a Pokemon game. Now, that doesn't mean that it is acceptable to have a game run as poor as Pokemon Scarlet and Violet did. However, that felt like a smaller issue to me given everything else that was going on in the game. And now, frame rate's not really an issue, and it's kind of cool seeing people come back to Pokemon on the Switch 2 and realize that, hey, despite these technical issues, there is a pretty good game underneath here. So why have I put this much time in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet? Well, I kind of touched on it at the beginning of this video, the competitive scene. Now, this is something that doesn't really get talked a lot about amongst most fans. You know, Pokemon is very big. I think Scarlet and Violet sold like 25 million copies or something close to that, which is absurd. And a very small fraction of that cares about the competitive scene. However, a small percentage of 25 million players is still a lot. And I think, you know, we should give some credit to Pokemon Company. They actually do really support the competitive scene. They do a bunch of official tournaments. They do Worlds once a year where a bunch of people from all over the world come and play. There's prizes. It's this kind of support that you don't see with other Nintendo properties. I mean, looking specifically at Smash Bros. That's another game that I've put hundreds of hours in, and there is no support. But Pokemon, there is a thriving competitive scene that keeps growing and growing and growing. And yeah, I mean, that is a big reason why I've played so much. It's that support that the Pokemon Company is giving to the competitive side, and in turn, that is platforming a bunch of really cool creators, players who continuously cover these games and make it interesting. Obviously, after 500 hours though, my opinion has slightly changed a bit. So outside of performance issues, which we've already talked about, another thing that disappoints me about Scarlet and Violet is that there's not really any puzzles, there's no dungeon crawling, there are no caves you need to figure your way through, there's no friction apart from the battles. And this kind of bums me out. I do really miss that side of Pokemon. I miss delving deep into a cave in order to find a legendary, as opposed to just kind of stumbling on one. I mean, even the legendaries in Scarlet and Violet, all you had to do was find those rods or whatever, and then you go to the cave and then they were there. You don't actually go in the cave, you're not trying to find them, you're not navigating a maze, they're just there. And for me, that kind of takes away the mystery of Pokemon and really getting to explore its world and kind of getting some lore on these legendary creatures. The other thing I've noticed, having played through the beginning like 3 or 4 times at this point, is that it's so long. There's so much text and so much of it is like nonsense. Look, I'm 32 years old. I probably shouldn't be playing Pokemon anymore. I still am. It's meant for kids. Kurt's laughing because
I may or may not have already been thinking that while shooting this.
Yeah, you know, everyone watching it is thinking it too. That said, you can't skip these, you know, you have to like mash the A button through it. I wish I could just skip these cutscenes, man. Like I don't care. Haven't cared in a long time. I just want to get through the story, catch the Pokemon I like, collect them all, and battle.
Would you have cared when you were a kid?
No, I think I still would have skipped through it, because even when Pokemon like Red and Blue came out, I was still just like mashing A through the dialogue. I didn't care. But I think, you know, with that, when it came to Red and Blue, right? Like, we talked about it, but the story's not really a big thing, you know? It's just, hey, collect all the Pokemon, get all the badges, and also my grandson's a dick, and try to beat him in Pokemon battles. And that's it. You don't really need to know. And with Scarlet and Violet, they're introducing all these characters and these different quest lines you can go on. It's not aimed at me. That's fine. I don't need to be entertained by Pokemon's story, but I do want to skip it. Please let me skip it. The other thing that I didn't get to talk too much about in the review was the multiplayer. So this is kind of divided into 2 things, because I think on one end, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet does multiplayer pretty well. On the other side, I don't think it does. So let's start with what I think it does well. I think playing online battles competitively is very good. I think it is probably one of the best iterations they've ever done. And it just makes sense. Like, sometimes it doesn't feel like it's a Nintendo game, because I feel like there's always friction when you're trying to play online with a Nintendo game. But this is fairly easy. You log in and you battle. It's that simple. You can rent teams, so you don't need to spend hours and hours building teams, and you can find rental codes online from players you like, or just, you know, content creators who create teams. You can pull that team and you can try it out yourself. I think it's cool. Now, the part that isn't is the co-op. It's pretty underbaked. Pretty much all you do is you invite your friends in and you can explore the world together, but that's it. Like, you don't really share the same instances, so like Pokemon I see, another person won't necessarily see. You can't just interact with them in battle or trade. You have to go through like weird menus in order to make that happen. If someone gets kicked for whatever reason, you have to kick everyone and start the lobby again. You can't just invite mid-exploration, which is pretty annoying. I think the only benefit of playing in a group is that you can easily join each other's terror raids, which is handy. You don't need to like pass around a code. But it seemed like such a cool idea, you know? You can explore the world with friends, but it doesn't really feel like you're actually exploring the world with them. You just see them, and that's it. Other than that, you're kind of in your own worlds doing your own thing. And finally, another reason why I think Scarlet and Violet are one of the best mainline Pokemon games are the DLC. Now, I will say that I think the Teal Mask was okay. That was the first one. However, the second one, the Indigo Disc, I think is some of the most challenging combat that they have ever put in a Pokemon game, at least in a very long time. It is all double battle focused. They bring back a ton of fan favorite Pokemon, including all the starters and a bunch of legendaries. I think pretty much all the legendaries. There might be a couple box art legendaries that don't appear, but for the most part, They add pretty much everything there. They also added a bunch of moves that kind of shook up competitive a little bit, and it's all presented in this package of you're fighting the Elite Four in this terrarium where you are exploring 4 distinct biomes, and each one has an Elite Four member that you need to fight. And one of the Elite Four members uses Trick Room, which is insane. Like, that is not, like Pokemon NPCs don't do stuff like that. I was doing a double battle today with an NPC who had out Flygon and Dragonite and was just Earthquake spamming me, which you can do because they're both flying, and I was kind of getting destroyed by it because I wasn't prepared for it. There's like some really interesting battle mechanics that get used, and I really hope that for future Pokemon games, we don't get that stuff in DLC. They include that sort of challenge post-game, or include a battle tower, which they don't have in Scarlet and Violet, which I think is a big missed opportunity, but that's for another video. So, do I still think Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is one of the best mainline Pokemon games of all time? Yes. Is it one I'm going to keep coming back to? Yeah, at least for now. I think for me, I'm always going to be following the competitive scene. So when the next Pokemon game comes out, I'm going to jump on that, I'm going to burn through the story, and get invested in competitive as soon as I can. But I genuinely think that even though this Pokemon game had probably one of the most controversial launches of any Pokemon game so far, I genuinely do think that this is one of the most interesting and exciting mainline Pokemon games we've had in a very long time.